Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us for the post-election town hall. I'm Janet Vaughn, Senior Director of Member Services for the American Alliance of Museums, and I want to thank you for being here with us for this first in a series of online town halls. If you're having any technical difficulties, please call us at 202-289-1818, and we'll try and assist you so that you can get logged in successfully. Just so that you know, we have all of you muted because there's so many participants today. We wanted to be able to control the sound quality, so you are muted. So we're going to be using the chat function if you want to make any comments. To find the chat function, you just need to move your cursor across the top of your screen, and then you'll see a drop-down box that has an option for the chat box on the right-hand side, towards the right-hand side of your screen. Click on that, and it'll open up the chat function, and you type in your question or your comment in that box that's next to the send button. So, with the elections just behind us, we thought that we'd kick off this first in a series of post-election of town halls with a post-election review and a discussion of its potential impact on museums. This is very much on our minds as we prepare for the 5th Annual Museums Advocacy Day coming up in February. Registration for Advocacy Day is now open. It's free to all members of the Alliance, and it's easy to do on our website. So we hope that we will see all of you in Washington on February 25th and 26th as we make the case for museums on Capitol Hill. So just a couple of housekeeping items. Again, use the chat function if you want to make any questions or comments throughout this. You can make your questions at any time during the presentation, and then we'll address them after the presentation. So I want to introduce our three speakers today. We're going to have Ford Bell, President of the American Alliance of Museums, Gail Silverlead, our Senior Director of Government Relations and Advocacy, and Ben Kershaw, our Assistant Director of Congressional Relations. So, Ford, I'm going to turn it over to you for an introduction to today's discussion.
Thanks, Janet. And it's a pleasure for me to be with all of you today, albeit somewhat remotely. As Janet mentioned, this is the first of what we hope will be quarterly town halls pegged to issues and topics of interest to the museum field. And it seems appropriate, given the emphasis on advocacy that is embodied in our new tagline at the Alliance, Champion Museums, that the first of these events is focused on the recent election, the new Congress, and what it might foretell for our advocacy efforts over the next 2 years. I am sure that most of you, along with millions of other Americans, exercised your right to vote last week, with the margins so narrow in many of the states that decided this election. It has rarely been more evident that every vote counts. And now it's up to us, as the American Alliance of Museums, to determine how to work with the new Congress, just as it is up to you, as museum leaders across the country, to determine how best to work with your local, state, and federal officials. Gail will delve into some of the specific lessons we can draw from the election, but one message that has come through loud and clear is that diversity matters, that reaching out and serving a range of audience is vital for politicians and for museums. But what remains true is that museums are a bipartisan issue, and we must engage our representatives across all party lines. They will not come to us. We have to go to them, conveying the value message about what you bring to your neighbors and your communities every day. Elected officials need to hear from constituents, and we must make them aware of what you do. Everyone is a potential ally on one issue or another. For the present, as Congress gets down to work in this lame duck session, the paramount issue for us is the potential decrease in deductibility as a part of a deficit reduction package, the deductibility of charitable contributions. And longer term, for the new Congress and future Congress, is irrelevancy. I use that stark term because in our experience, many people on Capitol Hill do not understand the numerous and diverse contributions that museums make to communities across our country. We are not amenities. Advocacy is our best tool for communicating that. And when it comes to advocacy, knowledge is power. And you're going to have the opportunity to learn a lot today from Gail and her team, and so I will turn it over to.
Thank you, Ford, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Couldn't be more timely to talk about what's happening from the election and also what is going to happen next in Congress. We have a lot to cover, and we'll move quickly. We have a lot of topics to cover, and I will also encourage you to send your questions through the chat box, and also I will be posing a few questions for you to answer using the chat box. So I guess we'll go ahead and get started with the election results overview. The first thing I want to say is that when President Obama was reelected, if you looked at the electoral vote, it really looked like a big victory with his 332 votes. But if you really look at the percentage of how he was reelected, it really was extremely close. And so he comes back to Washington with new political capital, but also many, many challenges ahead. And I think he's starting to look at his legacy and what will that be. In the Senate, we have, and this is just a quick overview, we'll get more into detail soon. The Senate, 2 more Democrats than we saw last Congress. Technically, there are 2 independents also in the U.S. Senate, but they both caucus with the Democrats, so we'll count them as Democrats for the time being. On the House side, it's almost exactly the opposite, with 199 Democrats. They increased their numbers by about 8. Probably when all is said and done, there are a few races still outstanding. So the Republicans kept control of the House, and they still feel that they are endorsed to lead. But I want to emphasize that there's really a newness of Congress. This year, because there were so many redistricting, because of retirements, and because of other situations, we have a lot of new members of Congress, about 93 when all is said and done, and 1/3 of the House will have served for fewer than 4 years. So that means they're still getting up to speed on issues that affect museums on a national level. And also we know from the National Conference of State Legislators that 1/2 of state legislators have served 2 years or less. Now that's, of course, because of term limits and because of retirements and because of indictments and because of their further ambition. But I think it's really important to talk about the fact that today's city council person could be tomorrow's state legislator, and tomorrow's state legislator could be a U.S. senator one day, and who knows what will happen. One of our terrific advocates, Karen Witter, has said that back when there was this new state senator in her area with an unusual name, her husband, who's a lobbyist, went to visit him and got to know him well before anyone had ever heard of him. That state senator was Barack Obama, who became the U.S. senator, who then became president. And so I really encourage you not only to pay attention on the federal level, but really start with your state and local representatives. They're all pretty ambitious if they ran for office, and you never know where they'll end up. And so a few takeaway messages from this election. There really were many takeaway messages you can take away, but I think the first one is that the country really is very, very evenly divided, and it's incredible how close so many elections were. You could say this was a status quo election, but the country really moved farther apart. Many moderates lost their seats on both sides of the aisle, which I hope will not mean that there's more partisanship in the House and the Senate, but it is a fact that some of those moderates who really want to work together to get the solutions for the country, they lost their seats. So, future candidates will be looking at that and making decisions to run or not to run based on that. Certainly diversity was a key message, that was a key takeaway message from the election. Two things. I think one big takeaway is the eligible Latino voters in 2008 was about 19.5 million, and this year it was 23.7 million. It's a very, of course, as we all know, it's a growing population. And what it's meaning is that in certain states that used to be solidly in one corner are now more of swing states. To have 18% of the vote in Arizona and Nevada, the Latino voters, really makes museums have to pay attention. It really makes elected officials have to pay attention. And certainly it's a great lesson for us in the museum field that we have to serve all of our constituents just like elected officials have to serve all of their constituents. One final note, while the overall number of voters decreased by about 3% over the last presidential election, in the 18 to 29 category, it was up by 1%. And that's a pretty key demographic that in the past has been a little bit overlooked, I think, in the political arena. So another takeaway I want to leave you with is I want to ask people to use your chat box now to tell me, how do you think this happened? We had 8%, as low as an 8% congressional approval rating, and yet 91% of those who ran for office were reelected.
So again, to use your chat function, you can just move your cursor along the top of your screen, and you'll see a drop-down box, and you'll see the chat option towards the right-hand side. If you click on that, you'll open up the chat function.
So it looks pretty stark, and it's a little bit unusual, I think, but one of the reasons why this is that most people think that Congress doesn't do a good job, and frankly, most people in Congress would give Congress a failing grade as well. But most people say, but my guy, my local representative, right, exactly. Now we've got some answers coming in. We hate everybody else, but everybody else's representatives, but not our own. Our guy takes care of us. Our guy's been at my event. Our guy is, really supports my issues, gives me a big grin and smiles, and I have a great picture with my representative. Or perhaps my senator is, she's just a good person. She's around in the community. She comes to every county in our state. And so that's exactly right. And I think that's an important concept for why constituents matter. Constituent outreach, constituent efforts are really important. And members of Congress, maybe they can't get things done in Washington, but they certainly want to get things done at home. So it really helps to make the case why we need to have everybody involved. Your elected officials want to hear from you. So in this election, and thank you everybody with the chat, that's great. In this election, they say that few presidents have won election without winning Ohio. So lots of people were looking at Ohio. We were watching Ohio for a different reason, and that was because there was a great U10 in Ohio, renewed a $1 million 5-year property tax to support a few local treasures, including the Massillon Museum, and by a 57 to 43% margin, that was issue 10 was approved. And I think that's just a great bright spot. And a lot of there's always good news and bad news in the election, but I thought this was a particular bright spot. So congratulations to everyone affiliated with the Massillon Museum for that great victory. Now we're going to talk a little bit about what's coming next and what's on everyone's mind. In the lame duck session, which is already in play, has already begun, will go until they're finished. And we've heard a lot about the fiscal cliff. Everyone's talking about the fiscal cliff. What is the fiscal cliff, and how did we get here exactly? Well, it didn't really happen overnight. This is something that has been looming and put off and looming and put off, and we'll deal with it later. We'll extend things temporarily. And so all of these things happen, and now we're at this last moment. And if you get the impression from the news media that this snuck up on everyone and no one knew this was coming, totally not true. Everyone voted for this. In fact, there was a lot of political campaigns that talked about the president signed this into law, so somehow it was his plan. But actually it was something that Congress came up with. Congress agreed upon, all the members of Congress voted for it, and then, of course, the president did sign it into law to avoid the last fiscal cliff that we had. So now we have pending the sequestration, which effectively puts $109 billion in pending cuts into effect on January 2nd, unless Congress acts to change that. Now, the politics of sequestration, I think, are important. The president has already, I think, perhaps shown his hand, let's say, by saying it's not going to happen. The Secretary of the Defense Department has said that it will be devastating to America's military. And, I think that this is, and the Congressional Budget Office says it could lead to recession conditions. Now, on Wall Street, this is, you could say this is very chicken and egg. And on the one hand, the fact that there's this uncertainty is affecting Wall Street, and the fact that this hasn't been done, some of the elected officials feel that if something happens on Wall Street, that will help determine what will end up happening. So to me, that's kind of a little bit backwards and kind of a circular argument. But the big thing to know is that the tax reform could include a hit to charitable giving, and that's one thing that we're watching very closely. Now, the next thing is that, people are lining up on both sides of all of these issues. There are many places you could cut. There are many places you could look to increase revenue or cut other things. And one question that comes up is, when they talk about the deductions, are all deductions equal? Which are the most important, the home mortgage deduction or the charitable giving deduction or health care deductions or education deductions? And then the other question that comes up is, are all charities equal? So they may say that the charitable giving deduction stays in place, but does it apply to every type of charity, every type of nonprofit? And some people in Congress feel that universities and hospitals, and soup kitchens and veteran service organizations are not all created equal. That's what they've said. So we have to really watch that closely and see how they treat arts and culture and educational institutions like museums. And so we're watching that very closely. Now, where are people lining up on the sequestration? The Democrats are pushing for making permanent the middle-class tax cuts, and they're also really pushing for the tax cuts for the highest earners to expire. Some of them are pushing the Simpson-Bowles Commission report, which would replace the current charitable deduction with a 12% non-refundable tax credit, and that would applicable. It's the real problem with that is that it's very, very harmful to charitable giving, and so there's a lot of concern about that. The other thing that I think would also be very harmful to charitable giving is the fact that there's a plan out there now being by the Democrats, but has been pushed by the Republicans and Governor Romney, was to cap deductions. So you get a certain amount of deductions you can take, and if you use them for home mortgage deduction, great. If you use them for home mortgage interest, fine. If you use them for charitable giving, that's fine too, but you get to decide one way or the other. And we feel that the charitable giving deduction would be like the third thing people would do because they already have those other deductions set up in their finances. So we're really concerned about those two things. On the other side of the table, I think it's important to look at what the guiding principles are for the Republicans. And we took these things from the Republican Party platform, where they really want to protect religious organizations, charities, and fraternal benevolent societies. And that's why they say that the tax deduction for charitable giving is important. So hopefully we'll stick to that, and they'll not take away from that. And these are just guidelines, so we don't know for sure how this will play out. The other thing to know is that they made a very, very clear line in the sand for how spending decisions will be made. The first spending criteria, is it constitutional? And if they can make a case that certain kind of funding is just not constitutional for any reason, it will not be funded in their budgets, and they will not fund it going forward. Is it effective and absolutely necessary, and how important is it, and does it justify borrowing, especially foreign borrowing? So I think that is instructive for us as we look at the proposals that come down the pike. This is where the Republicans have laid out their guiding principles. Now, how many of you knew, you can answer this in the chat box, that Mitt Romney introduced Paul Ryan as his running mate at an AAM-accredited museum? It's true. You may be wondering why this slide is here, though, because, after all, they didn't win. But even though Paul Ryan will not be the next vice president, he will continue to be the House Budget Chairman. And this summer, that chairman, that committee, put out a budget. Now, this is another reason I'm going to ask you to use your chat box. I want you all to vote on which of these statements was included in the House-passed budget for FY13. Is it that museums and libraries are not a core responsibility? Is it that funding for NEA and NEH can no longer be justified? Is it that funding for these programs is a wealth transfer from poorer to wealthier citizens? Or is it that, well, charitable giving can make up the difference? Encourage you to take your guess. Any guesses? Some people are saying all, some people are saying A, B, C, D, D. Keep guessing, everyone. Good guesses. The answer is all of the above. All of these statements were included in the House-passed budget. And that is it's pretty scary stuff, because this is what a lot of people got together and said, this is what we feel, these are the principles for our budget for this year. So when we go in and we say, why don't they like museums? Why did they decide to zero this out? What's happening around that? The reason is that these are the views that a lot of these guys hold. And we can probably expect more of this in the future. So thank you, everyone, for guessing, and sorry, everyone, for this being the answer, but it is all of the above. Okay. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the congressional agenda and who is actually now in Congress. This new Congress really has, this is the slide that really reflects the fact that there is so much diversity now in Congress. It's really starting to represent our country, and as diverse as our country is. Not quite as much as it should be, but we're getting there. And I really want to say that the fact that 60 people of the new members, which is 2/3, have previously elective office. So this goes back to earlier when I said there's this pipeline, and we've got to get to people when they're at the city council level, when they're at the state legislator level. And we also, I know this crowd would appreciate hearing how historic this Congress is. We have some real firsts in the Congress. First, Buddhist senator, Hindu representative, Asian American woman in the Senate, and openly gay senator, and Tammy Baldwin. And I just think that's a great thing, because the country is really becoming more diverse, and the more diverse Congress can be, I think, the better. Hopefully they'll all get to know each other and work together in the coming months. I want to walk through a few of the people who were reelected or are retiring from Congress. One of our key champions was reelected, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. She's coming back. Hopefully she'll continue to be our champion on the Senate appropriations letter for IMLS funding. Also, a caution note, Jeff Flake, who spent many years in the House of Representatives, is going over to the Senate. He is somebody who is a true believer that the budget has to be cut, and he's been an earmark crusader, anti-earmark crusader, that is, and has at times said some things about, earmarks like for museums and other statements about wasteful spending. So we want to watch him, because now he'll be in the Senate, probably working closely with Tom Coburn, who's, although a good guy, one of the people who's been, working against museums. Want to really give a shout out here to Explora in New Mexico for bringing Martin Heinrich to our attention. This is somebody who was in the House and will now be in the Senate. And the thing about him is that he has often talked about how informal learning experiences are shaping his young sons, and his family regularly visits Explora. Hopefully they'll continue to do that in the new Congress and in the new year. He's really a champion on the importance of science education and the role of informal learning centers. So again, I just want to give a shout out to Explora for following him and welcoming him and working with him. Another interesting new member of Congress is Jim Bridenstine. He is a Republican from Oklahoma. He's supported by the Tea Party. He was a former director at the Tulsa Air and Space Museum. So we're certainly going to go visit him when he gets to Washington and welcome him and talk to him all about museums, and we look forward to meeting him. And he is one of the other, new members of Congress with military service. I just thought that was the greatest picture instead of one of those stodgy old pictures with a suit and a tie and a flag in the background, so gotta love that. Also, Louise Slaughter, who's been a great champion for us, she's the co-chair of the Congressional Arts Caucus. She was also reelected. She had a very tight battle because of redistricting, but she managed to win reelection, so we're looking forward to having her be one of our champions once again. Also, there are a couple of people leaving Congress that we'll miss. Wally Herger from California, Republican from California, he was the lead on the IRA rollover bill, really spent 25 years in the House championing, I think, some nonprofit issues that really mattered, and the IRA rollover bill was a big one. Hopefully there'll be someone else to pick up where he left off on that issue. Also, Todd Platt from Pennsylvania, another champion of ours. He is also a co-chair, has been a co-chair of the Arts Caucus, and has been really involved with early childhood education. He's also leaving Congress. He's retiring. Some of these guys, it's sad because they've sort of decided that, you know, I don't need that aggravation in my life as a part of why some of them are leaving. Norm Dix is yet another one. He was a real champion for us on interior appropriations, which funds NEA and NEH, so we're going to really miss him. Another good guy. And also Howard Berman, who has been a friend to museums on intellectual property issues, and also some other issues related to foreign immunity issues. And so we'll really miss them. He was another victim of redistricting, where he had to run against a fellow member of Congress. So sorry to see him go. And finally, Judy Biggert, another great supporter from Illinois, who really a great leader on STEM education. So we're sorry to see her go as well. She also lost re-election. Now we want to talk a little bit about some of the key players. The IMLS is funded through the Labor, Health, and Human Services Appropriations Bill. And the chairman of that committee in the House has been Denny Rayburg. And he ran for the Senate and lost. So that means that there will be a new chairman of the Labor HHS subcommittee, and we don't know who that will be yet, but we think it's likely that it'll be somebody from either Florida, Georgia, Idaho, or Louisiana. We'll be watching that closely. If you're in one of those states and it happens to be your representative, we'll certainly be in touch with you about making some connections on that front. Also, another key senator I just want to mention, this is the last one, Senator Lamar Alexander, who's somebody who's been very helpful to the museum community. He's moving into a new role, it looks like, as the ranking member on the Labor, Health, and Human Services Subcommittee on the Senate side, and also will be heading up the Help Committee, taking the place of Mike Enzi, who's been one of our other champions. So, you know, I think one of the takeaways from this whole list is that museums are really bipartisan and are a bipartisan issue. And we have friends on both sides of the aisle, and if they're not helpful on one issue, they're helpful on another issue. So everyone is a potential friend and ally on any given issue. So even if you may not think that your representative is going to support your issues, don't write them off, because there's definitely a way to get some connections made there. Now that we know some of the players, what's on their to-do list? So we're watching things like the appropriations and tax reform and, of course, the fiscal cliff. But everyone else is, you know, the likelihood is that a lot of these issues are going to be pushed off until another time. Maybe they'll do another temporary extension of 6 months or a year. This is kicking the can. It's really an Olympic sport on Capitol Hill, and they're quite good at it. So they also have other things that they want to accomplish. So I'll show you now some of the issues that are on their plate, and there are a lot of them. And they're already, right now in the lame duck session, you'd think that they'd come back to Washington and work only on the fiscal cliff issues. But no, the hearings that are going on right now are on many of these issues and other issues. And so, you know, there's only so much time in the schedule for them to get things done. And, you know, everybody's sort of digging in on their positions on these issues. So we'll have to see what happens. But, you know, I think this is just a subset of all the issues that many people feel can really get done in this Congress. And so it's a little scary. We're not sure what's going to happen, but these are the issues that other people are following. In terms of education, I'm sure you're wondering, why wasn't education on that list? In lieu of the pending reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, the Department of Education has really been active in creating funding incentives like Race to the Top and doing regulations and providing waivers to states on No Child Left Behind. So a lot of the work is taking place at the Department of Education as opposed to in Congress. It's not clear yet whether there's going to be any action in Congress, but it doesn't seem to be a key issue that's going to come up. But we'll be watching that, and we have our own agenda on education, and we really want to make that case come Museums Advocacy Day. So stay tuned on that. You know, one thing I want to say, though, about education is that there are a lot of stakeholders in education, and this is just a partial list. And I would really challenge museums and ask you, do you consider yourself a stakeholder in education? And do you demonstrate to the public that you're a stakeholder? And if so, how? And more importantly, are you perceived as a stakeholder in education? I think it's, you know, it's a real opportunity, and it's a real eye-opener sometimes when we go to visit with members of Congress and we talk about the educational work that's going on in museums. They're often very surprised to hear that, and we need to change that because we have some great messages. We're doing great work. Now, I'm going to ask you to imagine for a moment that you are a member of Congress, especially a new member of Congress. I'm sure you're excited. Congratulations. And let's look again at this to-do list. Now, this is a lot of issues to come up to speed on, and you may get media requests to answer questions on these things. You may get constituent letters that are coming in, and you're expected to be up to speed. You know, how would you handle that? What would you do? Who would you rely on to help you decide what you're going to do? Well, the answer is constituents, constituents, constituents. Constituents visits have more influence than any other influence group or strategy. They've asked Capitol Hill. It's clear to anyone who's been around Capitol Hill that constituents matter. And remember back to that slide when we said that there was as low as an 8% approval rating, and yet 91% were elected because they're listening to their constituents. And one thing that you can do as constituents is you can really be our eyes and ears out there. All year long, in lots of ways, you can send us your intel. You can sign up for their email alerts. For all members of Congress have an email alert system. You can follow them. You can retweet them. You can like them on Facebook. Remember, you don't have to like them to actually like them. And now, I really want to challenge you to provide us with as much information as you can, because information is really powerful. And when we put it all together, and we know that, and we have a couple of advocates who do this, and those of you who do it, we really, really appreciate it, because there's so much information out there, but sometimes the local information is the most helpful. So now we're going to turn to, real quickly, some tools that we have to help you advocate. We've traditionally talked about museums as just good. Museums are good. They're doing important things. They're educational. They're economic impact. When people ask, what's the most effective way to influence public policy, the answer is it really depends. It depends on your audience. Just like you would consider that in approaching a new donor, you would also consider this in approaching an elected official. So what matters to them? What makes them tick? And these are some of the issues that may resonate for you. But you may be wondering, well, I've already told them my economic impact, and it didn't seem to make an impact, or I don't know if they see our museum as a community anchor, and maybe they're not that interested in education, and whatever. Here are some new ideas for you in how to approach Capitol Hill. Capitol Hill is filled with people who want to solve problems, and museums are, if nothing else, they're problem solvers. They're addressing community needs, and these are some of the key issues that are being covered right now. Really interesting to members of Congress. When you start talking about teacher training, they start writing notes because they're real interested in that. When you have a program that serves people on the autism spectrum. They're so interested in that because it's one of those problems that it's just too hard for them to solve. But if there's a community solution, they're thrilled. Of course, anybody who's serving veterans or wounded warriors, that's key. They really want to hear about that kind of thing. So if your museum is doing any of these things, and actually I'd like to ask you if you're doing any of the things on this page, write in the chat box. I'd like to hear which one of these issues is your museum working on, offering programs to your community on. And then I want you to answer the second part of the question is, do you think your elected officials know about it? And my guess is that they may not. I recently was speaking with about a few dozen history leaders, and I asked them, these were small institutions that they were part of, and I asked them, how many of you are involved in homeschooling? And almost every hand went up. And then when I said, how many of you think your representatives are aware of that, almost every hand went down. And homeschooling is a big, big issue for congressional members. They are really interested in that. They want to know more about it. And if members can hear from their constituents how they're addressing this issue, I guarantee they'll be interested. They may even want to come along if there's some program going on in any of these areas. So I hope you'll let us know what issues you're working on. And finally, it's not just a good idea to bring these issues to Congress. It's also, it might be a requirement soon. You know, when the health care reform bill was passed, there was a small provision in there for hospitals to undergo community benefit reviews. And these community benefit reviews require that the IRS conduct these studies. About 3,000 nonprofit hospitals are undergoing them now, and these are the questions that they're being asked to answer. How well do you serve your community? Do you have a governing board made up of a broad base of community members? And are you allowing your entire community to participate in your activities? Now, if this happened under healthcare reform, if I'm a betting person, I wouldn't be surprised if this kind of community benefit review could be included in some kind of a tax reform package. And so I think that there's a lesson here for us. If we have to be able to prove that we're benefiting our community in a variety of ways, and these are just the criteria that were laid out in the healthcare reform bill. So just note that when I give you this list, like here, I really think that it's important to make sure that it's clear in your community that you are solving community problems, and these are the major problems. These are some of the major problems that you might be addressing, and certainly there are other ones, so let us know what you find there. Now, I want to provide for you, lastly, some online resources. Our advocacy website, we've really put a lot of work into that. You can find out who represents you. It might be somebody totally new this year. You can find their contact information. You can also buy the book on advocacy. You can also download it for free if you're an AAM member at any level. You will be able to get an entire free copy of the advocacy book. And I think it's quite good, that book myself, but then again, I wrote it. So now I am going to provide for you just a few words on Museums Advocacy Day, and then we'll leave plenty of time for you to ask any questions you have. The overview of Museums Advocacy Day is this is really your chance to make a unified case. I tell you, it is so powerful to have sitting around a table with a senior staff person or a senator, and you have a history museum and a children's museum and a science center and an aquarium. It's so powerful. It makes such a great impression about there being a museum field, and then everyone talks about what they're doing. It's just a great opportunity. Also, it's really about building relationships. You know, we have an agenda that we're pushing, but also it's important to build relationships that you can then take home. A lot of people have told us that they've translated the lessons they've learned at Advocacy Day back to their home state and their locality. And so they've really appreciated what we've done, and we hope that all of you will join us. Also, it's your chance to be heard, and we make it really easy to participate. The first night is an informal, optional Oscars watch party. The second day is legislative and political briefings. There's a great reception we're planning. If this is going to be your 5th time coming to Advocacy Day, we're going to honor you because you guys are stars. Those of you who've been here every year, we have some specific programming just for directors and CEOs, and really there's a focus this year on networking, so we're really excited about that. Finally, on Tuesday, we send everyone up to Capitol Hill. You'll be ready to make your case. You'll be meeting with elected officials, and we'll have a congressional reception that night. So just want to give you a quick timeline. This is my last slide, I promise. And what's happening next? The lame duck session is in place. There's a charitable giving lobby day coming up. There is also going to be the tax provisions expiring, and I'll just put all of these out here. You know, there's a lot happening in the next few weeks and months. We'll be following everything very closely, but we're really going to rely on our constituents because so are members of Congress, relying on constituents, and they need to hear from you. They're happy to hear from us, but they're really happy to hear from you. So I encourage you to get involved and ask questions as you can, and I hope we've had some questions. And now I guess I'm going to turn things over to Ford.
Well, I just think we should point out for our listeners some of the great thoughts that came in when you asked about what are museums doing in the communities. One of the listeners has a community gardening program. Another one talked about hosting AmeriCorps teams that work in the museum and the community. Another museum is providing marine science education to homeschool children. Another one is reaching out to English as second language and immigrant families. Another has outreach to veterans. These are very powerful stories and very important community programs that we all need to do a lot better job of communicating and talking about more broadly.
Gail, thank you for all of your comments. I think you gave us a lot to think about, and it really does underscore the need for us to speak with one strong voice as we make the case for museums. Ben has been monitoring your questions as they have come in, and if you have others, please go ahead and send them to us now. I'm going to turn it over to Ben, and he's going to pose some of your questions to Gail and Ford now.
Thanks, Janet. Gail, here's a question that came in. Without major changes in the White House or the composition of Congress, does this mean more gridlock? And why is our advocacy worthwhile or important, I guess, if there's gridlock?
Thanks, Ben. That's a great question. You know, I think that there is gridlock until something happens, and when something happens, it's likely to be something big, and we don't want to miss the boat. And you have to make your case early and often. You know, when I came here to AAM, I knew that an advocacy day was absolutely essential because most industries, they're on the Hill every single year, and in between those things, they are following up, they are sending emails, and it's really important to make your case. It's so easy to get lost in the crowd if you're not, you know, they say if you're not at the table, you're going to be on the table. So I think that is instructive for us. So while there may be gridlock, and I think gridlock is kind of a part of life here in Washington, and certainly it looks like the Congress has sort of moved farther apart, there is a growing sentiment on the part of the people to get something done and stop wasting time and get something done. So hopefully, despite all of the re-elections, we will see some action this time around. It's definitely important. I promise you that if you sit down and let other people advocate for their things instead of your things, you'll be left behind. It's pretty much guaranteed.
Thanks. Here's another question from the chatters. You know, like you said, there's a lot of people making their cases. If the museum field's not being represented enough, what do our chatters need to recommend? What do our chatters need to do to help spread the word? And they're not just I'm extrapolating here, but you know, not just among members of Congress, but in their museum and in their community.
Well, you know, I would say that the key secret ingredient, if you will, is really your board members. I mean, you have any person who's out there saying, gosh, I'm just one person at my institution and I wish we could do more. You have an entire board of people who you regularly probably engage or try to engage in development and fundraising, in some of your connections and programming. Certainly some or all of them would be interested in advocacy. And I would say that the first thing you should do is to put advocacy on your next board meeting agenda. And if it's and then start from there and tell people that you participated in this this town hall meeting and that you want to continue the dialogue and you want to develop a plan for them to get involved. And hopefully have your museum represented at Advocacy Day, if not by you, but by a member of your board, or both.
Gail, how might we get more of our museum colleagues involved in this effort?
I think if you forward all of the information you're getting, I think that joining AAM is a great way to promote museums in all different ways, but certainly it adds to the voice here at AAM.
Ford?
I want to just back up a sec to the trustee issue. I think it's really, really important that we work to get trustees involved in national issues facing the museum field. A friend of mine in the museum field has referred to trustees as the great sleeping giant of advocacy, and I think that's absolutely true. I've been a museum trustee and was virtually never asked to do anything related to advocacy, and I think our museum trustees have time, they have resources, and they have, most importantly, they have community connections that can help us enormously with the advocacy, and we need to really work hard to engage them with the broader museum field.
Ben, do we have other questions?
Yeah, this is a related question. How do you go about approaching senior management or others, if there hasn't been staff or budget allocated to advocacy efforts?
Well, assuming that the person asking is somebody who's at the museum, working at the museum, you probably have a regular staff meeting. You also could ask for advocacy to be part of your next staff meeting, and ask, if you're willing to take it on and you're willing to run with it, then maybe you'll be able to make a brief presentation about what you recently learned from AAM in terms of what's coming and how museums can get involved, and you may want to ask for a meeting with your director to see if that can be done and what else. Maybe they have some ideas for what they'd like to do, but maybe they don't have the time for it, and if you volunteer yourself and you're willing to add it to your probably many other responsibilities, they may be very appreciative of that.
One other question. Gail, you mentioned changing demographics of voters and in Congress. How do we need to advocate in that environment?
I think that museums can play an important role here by demonstrating how they serve all of their constituents. And I think museums do an exceptional job about this and are striving to do an even better job of this, probably in ways that elected officials aren't aware of. So let's say that an elected official has a large Asian American population, and they're not Asian themselves, but they really want to reach out to this group. A museum may have a program already going on. A museum may have an exhibit that's opening. They may have some kind of connection there, and an elected official would just jump at the chance to come to that museum, be part of a program, participate in a program, maybe have a town hall meeting at the museum. There's all kinds of ways that members of Congress will appreciate using in a good way your connections to connect with their constituents.
Any other questions, Ben?
We have one more question that came in. Maybe this one's good for Ford. AAM's had some big changes lately. What sort of feedback have you gotten on the changes at AAM?
That's a great question. I've been mostly on the road this fall. I've been everywhere from, I can't go A to Z, but I can go Albuquerque to Peoria, I guess. But anyway, I've had been lots of different meetings, which has been great, discipline-specific and state association meetings. And the response has been overwhelmingly positive, especially when I've had, people understand that what we want to be at AAM is not the trade association of museums. We want to be the cause of museums. And we think that fits in much better with our advocacy strategy. We want to be able to draw in people who work in the museum field, people who volunteer for the museum field, trustees in the museum field, people who do business with with our museums, and people who just love museums. We need to get everybody to speak up for museums, and we can't just talk to ourselves. And so that's our goal, is to bring together a strong coalition, to be the cause of museums, to do a much better job of advocacy and promoting, speaking of the value of our institutions and what you are all doing in your communities every day.
I think that is all of the questions that we've received. I want to let everyone know that the slides and the audio from this program will be available on our website shortly. And I want to thank Ford and Gail and Ben and all of you for joining us today for this town hall. We certainly know that we have a lot of work for us to do, and we hope that you'll be joining us for Advocacy Day, February 25th and 26th here in D.C. So thank you very much, and thank you for your support of the museum field and of the American Alliance of Museums.